Well, hello and welcome once again to the DCL podcast, where we're inviting you to sit back, relax, and we'll be on our way shortly. Well, welcome back to the DCL podcast, and I'm excited about this one because this is a topic that we haven't talked about yet, and we are going to go down to LA and talk to Listener Kyle and his trip over to Northern Europe and with an ABD add-on on the trip. But before we jump in and introduce Kyle to the show, I'd like to welcome back to the show the co-host of the show from PackYourPixieDust.com. How are you doing today, Christy?
Hi, I'm well. How are you?
Not too bad. And we're just talking. You raced a couple lights and made it here on time to do the recording today, huh?
I did no such thing. I had one light and I followed all the speed and traffic laws on my way here.
And being
Uh-huh.
even Kyle's well, let's bring Kyle in. Welcome to the show, Kyle. How you doing today?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you both?
Not bad. And even Kyle's doubting our lawyer from Michigan, huh? So
We actually have in the Detroit area very generous traffic laws. You could do quite a bit and not get in trouble here.
Is it the same down in LA there, Kyle?
They give you like a 10-mile grace over the speed limit.
Roughly or so. Well, cool. Well, welcome to the show, Kyle. I'm really excited. I really want to thank you for reaching out and offering to come on the show. This is a topic today that we have not talked about yet, and that is talking about an Adventures by Disney add-on as you guys cruised on an 11-night Northern European sailing this past July from Dover up through Northern Europe and eventually ending in Copenhagen. And we were talking a little bit before the show. This wasn't your first ABD, was it? When was the first one that you guys did?
A couple years ago, we did the Adventures by Disney Backstage Magic Tour with Christie's competitors, The Diz.
What were your thoughts of the Backstage Magic? It's a show. I know they say that that's kind of like the lead into Adventures by Disney sometimes, as far as, once you do that, it just kind of hooks you and takes you on. Did you kind of feel that way once you guys did that trip?
It's funny that you mentioned that. We were unsure about ABD. As most people know, ABD is not the most inexpensive way to travel. So we decided to take the Backstage Magic, even though we live in Southern California and that's where it takes place. But it's a short trip and it's one of the more inexpensive ABD trips there is. It had the added benefit for myself as to travel with John and Kevin from Dreams Unlimited, and they added a few extra magical touches for us. And once we did that, we fell in love with ABD. The guides are spectacular. They just know so much about Disney, and they're so enthusiastic about their product and Disney in general.
For a little bit of housekeeping for the listeners, ABD is Disney's guided tour program, and it doesn't necessarily have Mickey Mouse. Now, Backstage Magic will, because it's at Disneyland, but the rest of them are not going to have Disney characters, and it is for all ages. They say the minimum is 4, but so that would be the minimum, but suggested is about 6 and above. But they'll do guided tours of the different locations. We've covered a couple of different ABD shows that people can go back and listen to. But again, this is Adventures by Disney, and it's their guided tour program. There are 2 guides for every 20 people, generally speaking. And then those those guides stick with you for the entire tour. I understand the ABD tour, which we'll talk about, that you did is a little bit different because it's during the cruise port days. So typically what you would do is you would travel as a whole group. Your ABD tour group would stay together for the whole group. This one, you're going on a cruise, and then you're spending some of your port days, or maybe all, you'll tell us in a minute, of your port days doing the guided tour. And so that's sort of how they deal with that.
It is every cruise day, and we also had activities on at-sea days as well.
And this is one of the reasons why I was really excited that you reached out to talk about this. Now, I know, just kind of following ABD, I think this is somewhat new over the last 2 years where they're really expanding, especially in the, mostly in, do they do it in Alaska now that I think about it? I know it's mostly in Europe.
Recently.
Okay. And prior to this, it seemed like most of the ABD add-on, I guess, is kind of more like prior to the cruise or after the cruise in the different port cities where they would start. And it seems like, I think, was it last year when they first really started expanding onto your actual, the whole entire cruise itself? Do you know, Kyle?
I know for a fact that people on our cruise, on our ABD adventure, were on last year's Mediterranean add-on, and they actually had the same guides.
And so we're starting to really see them expand throughout the cruise line, especially in Europe and, as you said, into Alaska, where not only can you book these ABD excursions prior and after the cruise, but it encompasses the entire cruise itself, like what you guys experienced.
That's correct.
Let's just start with the cruise itself, I guess. Why did you, or who all went on the cruise, and why did you guys pick this Northern European cruise this year?
So I have a family of 3, my wife and my daughter, who's she's now 13. We picked this particular cruise because the last year we did the Alaska cruise on the Wonder, and it was the extended version, the one that actually goes through Hubbard Glacier. And my daughter had met a number of the children in Edge, and they all decided on that trip that we were going to do this cruise. And so we actually were on the cruise with, and even on ABD, one of the families that was on the Wonder came on this cruise and on ABD as well.
That's kind of dangerous if I'm going to let my kids pick what we're going to do next. You're a good father. So, no, that's awesome that she had such a great time, and then you guys kind of expanded this into Northern Europe. So you picked the Northern European cruise because of those reasons. And then when did you kind of start to look into ABD, I guess, as far as using ABD for your port excursions?
One of the big advantages for me, and I also knew about ABD as well going into it, but one of the reasons why I picked it is I'm only a silver Castaway Club member. The European sailings especially, the excursions tend to fill up quickly, at least the ones that I would like to do. If you do the ABD, obviously all your excursions are included, and they're always the top excursions in every city. So that's why we stuck to this. I looked at the price differential, and yes, it is more expensive, but there are quite a few advantages that we'll get into later about why ABD is a very positive alternative if you can afford it.
One of the advantages, too, for those who don't know, you can go to, I think you have to go through ABD's site to be able to find these add-ons to the different cruises. It talks about it on DCL's site, but I think you actually have to go to ABD or to Adventures by Disney's website, navigate to the cruises, and then that's where you can pull up where they add the different excursions for the different cruises. And looking at this one, were you pretty excited about the different opportunities that they had at each one of the ports?
Again, another reason why I picked ABD is a lot of these ports I wasn't very familiar with.
Uh-huh.
Like I had never even heard of Tallinn, Estonia before. And some of the other cities, I looked at what the options were on the short excursion book, and I wasn't real positive about what I would. So I know ABD is always going to pick at least what they consider, the most exciting places. So, by doing that, it helped me make planning easier. On a normal trip, my wife and I, we were like those planner types, where we're on the exact day and time you have to start everything to book everything. And with this, it was a very stress-free environment. I let my travel agent, I said, I want to be on ABD. And he says, okay, we'll sign you up. The only thing about this particular cruise is like, Chrissy said, most ABD adventures are about in the high 20s, maybe 30 people. This adventure was so busy, so full, that we had 2 groups of 44.
Wow.
So not only did they fill up the first 44 right away, I mean, it literally sold out before I had signed up for the cruise 12 months in advance. So I got put on a waiting list. And then I was the last person of the second 44 to get on. Phone call from my travel agent, and he says, you have 2 minutes to decide. Go.
And they're not inexpensive. So you have 2 minutes to decide if you want to spend a ton of money. Wow.
Right. It doubled the cruise price.
Yeah.
One last thing, I guess, before we get into it, and I totally appreciate what you're saying there, Kyle, because when we looked at our Mediterranean stuff, when you try to navigate, just getting to Europe and then what you're going to do in the cities before you leave on the cruise, and then you start looking at the different ports that they go into, and a lot of it, I mean, it can take you weeks to do a lot of the background, trying to figure out, what excursion's right for you, what would work best for your kids, and as you saw going on the Backstage Magic, and I know Christy and I being able to talk, and all of us have listened to podcasts that people have talked about, how good ABD does, how good of a job ABD does as far as taking you to places, immersing you in those stories of that place, and kind of really giving you a quality experience. You're kind of putting yourself in good hands. So I totally appreciate what you're saying about having them kind of have your back on it, because boy, it was just, look at the Mediterranean, there was like so many different options. It was really hard to pick from them sometimes, and sometimes you're kind of throwing a dart at the board to see what was going to work.
And the Mediterranean is a little bit easier of one to do that with, more than the Northern Europe itinerary.
Because the Mediterranean has more cities that and places to go that you've heard about before, and you're excited about trying. Whereas this one, like I said before, I was going into these cities where I have no idea what's famous about the city.
Definitely. Well, let's just jump in and talk about how it works. So you guys fly to London, I'm assuming, and then you make your way down to Dover. Is there anything done before you actually get on the cruise with ABD, or does it start once you get on the cruise itself?
It starts the moment you get into port. There's the regular check-in for the cruise line. They have a separate desk on the side, and they have a big sign there, and the two guides are there waiting for everybody. And they have a short meet and greet there with just so you can meet the guides, and they give you a package of things that ABD provides.
And so they kind of step you through the check-in process, and then once you get on board the ship that first day in Dover and you depart Dover, is there anything that happens that first day at sea? Do you guys have kind of like a get-together on the ship as well?
So similar to the regular land ABD adventures, there's the first night, instead of having dinner together, we had just like a cocktail hour together where they provided snacks and whatnot. And they had all the families, just like the land adventure. Everybody gets up and you introduce yourself. You tell a little about yourself, just to get everybody introduced to each other.
Where do they have that at? Just out of curiosity. That's a lot of people, 88 people or so.
With the 88 people, they separated into two groups. So we were only ever with the 44. Each group had two guides each. So Rusty and James normally do the Mediterranean together, and they split up, and then they each brought in another person to help them. And my second person was Pam, along with James. And then so our group of 44, they always, anytime there's a meetup of the groups, they did it separately. So we only saw the other group as we were traveling to places. But they had a separate bus, we had a separate bus. And it became this game. Whose bus would get there first and whatnot.
You have that cocktail hour. You get to meet your guides there again, and I'm assuming they kind of go over a little bit of the itinerary of what you're going to experience. Now, do you get to choose in the different port cities like different things that you want to do, or is it just kind of laid out? This is what we're going to do on this cruise. So
that's a great question, because one of the cities we were visiting was St. Petersburg, and my daughter is very much into ballet. And she does, the toe shoes. Uh-huh. And so we thought, maybe we can split off and do, they had a short excursion where you did a ballet. So the answer was, obviously, at any time you are allowed to leave the group, but then you're completely on your own to get back together. So they don't encourage people to split away from the group, but it is allowed.
Okay.
Our itinerary is completely set. There's always modifications as things tend to happen, as they always do in touring. Like, for instance, one of the Anne Frank Museum that we were supposed to visit, they were going through some, I believe it was construction or something like that. And so their hours weren't set, so we did something else instead.
Well, before we jump into the ports and that type of stuff, what were your overall thought, or what kind of room did you book on board the Magic? And had you been on the Magic before? Was this your first time?
This is my first time on the Magic. I had one of the special rooms. We had room 7620, which is technically a Category 7 room, but it's really a Category 5 room, and part of the view is obstructed. There's like a little corner of it that's obstructed. So it's the very farthest forward Category 7 room. I tend to actually like the Category 7 rooms in colder climates like in Alaska, because, when it's not so wide open, the wind doesn't come onto the balcony, and so it doesn't get as cold. In the warmer climates, I'd rather have the wide open balcony, but in the colder climates, it's nice to have the partially obstructed. So 7A is a favorite category of mine. But this special room has the actual same balcony as a Category 4 or 5, the glass, the open. But it's just, there's a little corner, and I actually hit my head on the corner being a dope.
Oh, no.
But once I figured out it was there, I stopped leaning over the edge there.
And what were your thoughts about having a balcony going through a Northern European cruise like that? Did you appreciate that as far as were you able to spend some time out there as you pulled into the ports, or any thoughts for somebody sailing Northern Europe as far as having a balcony?
I tend to like balconies. Even in the Caribbean, we would book a balcony room. So that's by far my favorite. In Alaska, to me, it's a must do. In the Baltic, I wasn't sure what it would be like, but there was one port where we departed, and you know how the sun stays up to like almost 10 o'clock at night, and we were departing one of the ports, and it was just like being in the inside passage in Alaska. I mean, you're going through this channel and there's islands, and it's very narrow opening going out into the sea, and it was so picturesque, you know, and there's little houses on these little islands, and you know, you hang out there, and you know, for me, I love it. It's not for everybody, but I do love it.
Was that leaving out of Stockholm by any chance?
Yes.
Yeah, it's beautiful up there with all those islands, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Amazing. So, well, good points there. We had a balcony, and we went on the Norwegian getaway up there last year, and we were out there quite a bit, actually, especially like as you left the ports in the evening. The sun's still up, so you do get some picturesque views sometimes. Anything else about the ship, I guess, before we jump into the actual port stuff with ABD, as far as being on the Magic that kind of stood out for you, like maybe the dinners? Any thoughts on Rapunzel's royal table?
So there is a thing about Rapunzel's that when they redesigned the restaurant, the entertainment is significantly better than it used to be, at least compared to, say, the Wonder.
Uh-huh.
And the food is fine, but the way they did the serving stations, they're not very close to the tables because they need all this space to do the show. And so it just so happened that where our tables were, our server had to go like halfway across the entire room to grab our food and to bring it to us. So dinner service was extremely slow for us. It took us 3.5 hours to eat often. So a number of the people on ABD did complain about the service being pretty slow. And so you could see that they made a lot of attempts to make it better. And in the other restaurants, it was better, but in Rapunzel's, service was significantly slower.
Did they, as a group, put you guys kind of together since you were traveling, you know, doing the shore excursions together in the dining rooms? Did they kind of put you guys together as well?
Yeah, all the ABD tables were together. And in fact, that was somewhat of a contentious point for some of the families because, as you guys often say, that most cruisers love the early seating, the main dining. ABD asks everybody to do the late seating because we're first ones off the ship, we're last ones on every port. Oftentimes, we were literally the last people on board the ship. And so that's why they wanted us for the late seating. And, you know, some of the families with, you know, the younger children weren't used to eating that late, and the dinner were taking so long. That was another problem. A couple families did ask to change to the main seating, and if there was room in the main seating, they were granted. I think only one family was allowed.
I'm assuming your daughter being 13, you said she was probably okay with it. What were some of the ages of the kids on the group that you guys were with?
So the youngest girl was, I believe she was 8 or 9. She was a fantastic little girl. I mean, she was so well behaved. She actually did the Mediterranean as a 6-year-old, and I talked to her quite a bit about her experiences with ABD, and she just loved it. So even at that young age, I think if you're you as a parent have to know your children, but if you're of the right mentality and you know your child can handle it, then, you know, even at 6-year-old, they'll very much appreciate the trip. Almost every child was in my group of 44. That's how they split up the group. I think they'd like to have all the children together in the largest group as possible because the children on ABD, they really bond a lot. I mean, it was pretty amazing how much time they spent with each other.
That actually makes sense and smart for them to do that. Plus, then anybody who's not traveling with a child can have their cruise experience be a little bit different.
That's correct. The interesting thing was they really tried to keep the group together, you know, being an extra big group. And it was funny that the group of only adults was the group that had someone get separated from the group and lost.
Oh, no.
So it wasn't the 8-year-old kid that got lost. It was the...
Nope.
Yeah. Oh, that's funny. Well, before we jump into the meat of it, which I think really a lot of people probably want to listen to, is like your experiences on the shore excursions. Anything else stand out with you on the ship during your 11-day cruise?
For me, it's pretty much the same as the Wonder. The only ship I haven't been on is the Fantasy. Our next cruise is on the Fantasy, and that will be on every ship on that cruise.
Well, okay, so let's jump into the itinerary itself. So it's 11-day cruise. You guys leave out of Dover. The first day, and I don't have it in front of me, I apologize, I believe is a sea day.
Yes.
And then you guys make your way up.
No, first day is Amsterdam.
Okay, the first day you head up to Amsterdam. So I'm guessing you meet the guides, they give you the packet, and they kind of tell you what to experience to the cruise. And just for the logistics of it, is that kind of how it works each day then? So like the night before, you guys will kind of get a heads up on what you're going to do the next day. Is that kind of how they prepare you?
So just like the regular cruise where you get a navigator,
Mm-hmm.
Adventure Disney gives you a separate sheet of paper that comes on your door that has the day's itinerary with it.
What was planned for you in Amsterdam?
I'm going to struggle with these names of places. So
that's okay.
We did the Zaanschans, which is essentially a place where they have, windmills and they build wooden shoes and things like that. So it's more like what you would picture of Amsterdam out of a child's book. It's actually a community that they try to keep it exactly like old time the Netherlands. So they actually had a guy who did the shoe, built the wooden shoes,
mm-hmm.
and they showed how they do it the modern way. And it's amazing that the wood that they use is so, you look at a piece of wood, right, and you think, oh, it's a solid piece. Well, it's like so full of water that as they carve it, all the water starts shooting out of it. And you wonder, where is all this water? But they go, that's part of what makes these shoes so good for them to work in that type of environment. They have to work in the fields in these shoes. And you would think a wooden shoe is going to be extremely uncomfortable because it's so stiff, but it's actually not that stiff, and it's actually not uncomfortable at all. And they wear these shoes all day for work.
I guess I didn't realize that they actually still. I thought most of it was like for decoration now and whatnot, but they actually use those out in the fields, huh?
Yeah, all the farmers still use those type of shoes.
That's amazing. Did you get to try
them? And so also there, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Everybody got to try on the shoe.
Uh-huh.
And like I said, it's quite comfortable. I was very surprised. And then also there, they did a demonstration of, it's actually pronounced Gouda cheese. I always thought it was Gouda, but they pronounce it Gouda. The cheese that you get there is quite different than what we get in America. It's quite a bit more flavorful. And they also, I didn't realize this, but Amsterdam was the first place where they invented dark chocolate. The first chocolate that was invented was milk chocolate, but in Amsterdam is the first place they invented dark chocolate. So they had a lot of dark chocolate samples as well as the Gouda cheese and the shoe demonstration.
I love how that you get all these fun little facts with ABD and things that you never would have thought to either look into and learn about or experiences,
Exactly. Yes. That's what makes it so magical. The guides do a very good job of picking the right things, and they try to make it so that the children would be engaged, and yet it's not like a child's tour. I don't know if that's making any sense, but
it makes total sense.
Yeah, all these cities are very adult-like. I would be afraid if I did have a child, if my daughter was like 4 or 5 years younger, that if she would have got bored, but none of the kids were bored. In fact, in some of the places, more the parents were bored because there's a lot of museums on this tour.
Well, so you start off with the wooden shoe factory. You talked about you were going to go to the Anne Frank house, but that didn't work out, so they had to switch things up. What did you guys do in the afternoon then? And I guess before that, is lunch included on all these tours, or how did that work?
All of our tours had lunch, and ABD is like snack crazy. So if you like to snack on these little things, they always have a huge bin of snacks, and that they're constantly passing around. There's always water to drink, so you'll never go hungry on an ABD trip. In fact, we get fed a whole lot more on this add-on than you do on a regular tour, because on a regular tour they tend to have time on your own where you have to find your own place to eat, and that would be under your own dime. For this add-on, everything was included. Instead of Anne Frank, what we did was we went to the Van Gogh Museum. Essentially, what they did, because it was kind of last minute, what they did is they offered you, those boxes that you press a number in front of like a certain piece of art, and it tells you a little about it. So you had that at that point, everybody spread out to the parts of the museum that they wanted to see, and you use this little box to give you an explanation about it. We did that, and then was followed by lunch. In Amsterdam, their big thing, which turned out to be a big thing in many places in Europe, was meatballs.
So not just in Sweden, huh? Over in Amsterdam as well.
3 places we had meatballs for lunch. And they were quite different in each place. Huh. The one in Amsterdam was more, I mean, they were all juicy in each place, but this one was more vegetable-y. There's a lot of mixing in their meat, I think, to make it last. The gravy was a little different than, say, a Swedish gravy. It was the most interesting flavor of a meatball that we've had in the trip.
You sort of got to become a meatball connoisseur at the end of your...
I've never had so many different types of meatballs before, that's for sure.
That was probably unexpected.
So what was your overall thoughts about them? Were you able to pick the food that you wanted to eat, or did they just kind of like you got to the table and this is what we're having today?
So before every port day, they'll come at the meeting before, they'll ask you, there's usually 2 or 3 choices. Usually there's a fish choice or a meat dish in every place. So my daughter she loves salmon, so she had salmon quite a bit. She became the salmon connoisseur while I was the meatball connoisseur.
Well, that's kind of cool that they give you a choice. And I know, Christy, having your food allergies, I'm sure that they're probably pretty responsive to that too, I'm sure.
Oh, very. If you have any food allergy, they bend over backwards, just like pretty much any Disney place that they'll try to do. We even made a point to tell them that my daughter prefers a lot of vegetables, and we did have one vegan in our group, and they helped her in each place.
Okay, so you guys have lunch, and then what did you guys finish up with your time in Amsterdam?
So we did a little canal cruise throughout the city, and we did float by the Anne Frank Museum. And it was relaxing, and you get to see quite a bit of the city, and while you're on the boat, they tell you, all the history of the city and how it is. And, you see people who actually live on their boat. Even parking your boat is not the most inexpensive place to be. Amsterdam is quite an expensive place to live, apparently. They have some interesting buildings. You've probably seen pictures. They're vertical, all the buildings. They're 3-4 stories high, but not very wide at all. Mm-hmm. And each building has like this window with a hook on top, and that's used to pull because the building's so narrow, stairs are narrow, so you can't bring furniture up. So they brought it up through the front of the building. So I thought that was a little interesting thing about all their buildings.
I remember we went there a long time ago when we lived in England. We took a trip over to Amsterdam, and there was like one. Did you guys go by it was like the narrowest house in the world or something like that? Did you?
I don't recall that.
It was like literally the width of a door. It was like there's a door, and then you had to have a little bit of a wall on either side to support the door frame, and that was as wide as the house was. It was crazy. I can't imagine anybody who lived in that, but would have loved to gone.
Well, even the general buildings are only about 3 or 4 doors wide.
Yeah, they're not very wide, are they?
No, not at all.
So overall, good time in Amsterdam?
Yes, it was one of my daughter's favorite places. It was a very nice city, nice and calm and not rushed. And being the first day, because this is a very long cruise, there's a lot of port days in a row. So there was a point in the cruise where some of the ABD members were getting a little tired because we go nonstop. Like I said, first off, last on, then we're nonstop the whole way. I didn't have it, I have this thing, my runner's watch, and it keeps track of steps. I never had a day where I was less than 10,000 steps.
Well, that's a good point, because that was like one of the things that we thought of when I looked at the Mediterranean cruise that we did. It's like boom, 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 port after port after port. And we took one of them as a down day. Did you feel like you needed that at all? And I guess it kind of depends upon who you are and what your energy level and whatnot is. But what was your overall thoughts about that? Did you kind of feel like you needed a down day along the way, or were you pretty happy with how it progressed?
For me personally, and my wife and daughter, we like to, when we're in port, we want to be on the go. We want to see as much as we can, do as much as we can, and be as active as we can. I'm older. I'm very late 50s. When we first started cruising with just my wife and I, after we got married, we cruised for 10 years before we had our daughters so that we could be active on cruises, wondering, like when we got older, if we could handle all the activity. But so because of that, I like to be active. In fact, I tend to lose weight on cruises because I'm so active on each port day. And I never allow myself ever to take the elevator.
Yeah, that's what we do too. So how about you, Christy? Do you guys ever take the elevator?
We do. I took it a lot on our little 3-night cruise. I felt like our room location on deck 6 made it a little bit easier because it wasn't too far up, too far down. Sometimes when we are in the front of the ship and up at the top, it does make those lower decks kind of far, like going down 8 flights of stairs to go to dinner or something seems a bit, it just becomes a little monotonous, you know. Obviously, it's easier to go down 8 flights of stairs, but it's just it's just like down and down and down, which is, you know, first world problems.
From Amsterdam, then is the next day a sea day, or do you go to Warnemünde from there?
We had a sea day before Warnemünde.
Okay, and talk a little bit about what kind of add-ons do they have during the sea day that you guys can do as far as with the ABD group?
So on our at sea days, they tended to have 2 options. One was you would have a place that you could meet. You could ask the ABD guides a question about anything, about either the tours themselves or about future ABD or about anything in general. They just like to hang out with the group to get to know people. We also had activities where, you know, we got a private session to do, you know, where they have the artists come in and they teach you how to draw a character.
Steve loves that.
And so if you love that, what happens is we drew Goofy, and sure enough, at the end of our drawing session, out comes Goofy for a little private photo session.
Oh, that's cool.
Oh, that's fun. So this is the one time that a Disney character does come on the Adventure by Disney tour.
Yes. So
or second time.
We had that a couple times where a character came out to have private photos with us.
That's awesome.
Another nice thing about Adventures by Disney add-on is that all your cruise photos are included. So any photo that a cast member takes, it's provided to you, as well as all the ABD guides as they do on every ABD trip. They have a number of cameras where they're constantly taking pictures of the group, of individuals, of your family, of the sites, and you also get those pictures as well.
That's an awesome add-on right just there in and of itself, not having to worry about, as you're touring around the different places, you know, taking those pictures and having somebody be able to take, because we were kind of joking about it the other day. My son had to take a thing for his back-to-school pictures, and our photos are always my wife and the 2 kids, because I'm always taking the pictures. That's kind of nice to have that add-on with ABD as far as the pictures go as well. Anything else that they add on that you can do during the sea days?
Not really. It's the sea days is mostly, you know, it's one activity and one, you know, chat session.
Okay.
That's pretty much.
So from there you move on to Warnemünde, which is the big port where people generally go to Berlin. Did you guys make your way down to Berlin, or what did they have planned for you there?
Oh, definitely. I think probably 90% of the ship went to Berlin that day, all on the same train. We actually pulled into port late by a couple hours. Oh. So that causes all kinds of headaches with everybody's excursion as well as ours. So you can see our guides, they're on their phone constantly with the ship personnel as well as people on land so that they can rearrange things. It's quite a long train ride from Warnemünde into Berlin. It's normally a 3-hour trip, but because we were late, they did it in 2.5. They actually ran the train at full speed.
Wow.
To save a half an hour.
That's the power of Disney, though, right? Like, they can get a city to run their train quicker.
And so that's one of the things that ABD does. They, you know, like I said, things always happen. And if anything is not going exactly to their plan, they have contingencies in place, and they're on the phone constantly trying to make sure for each guest that they're not affected.
I feel like there is a lot of hidden value that ABD provides that people might not necessarily see, that everybody might not see, but that it's there. It's not just that they're trying to charge you a bunch of extra money for this excursion. It is that you're actually getting something for that extra money.
That's right. And how they handle when things don't go to plan, I think that's what they do exceptionally well. Like on our Backstage Magic, something happened and President Obama happened to fly into town when we were on our tour, and that caused a lot of traffic issues because they closed so many streets.
Sure.
And they were able to change orders of things to meet, you know, the needs of where we had to go, where we had to be, and whatnot. And I think a lot of people won't notice this because they don't try to tell you that they're changing plans. You know, they're just trying to get people to the next stop. But because of my work, I tend to notice things that other people don't notice. And so I can see them working behind the scenes and what they do. And then, you know, when we have these little hour sessions where we talk, I'd ask them, okay, at this port, I saw you doing this. What was going on? And they'd explain, oh, you know, something went wrong. We had to deal with it. And this is what we did. So you get to Berlin, of course, the big thing there is to see what's left of the Berlin Wall. There's not much of it left, but wherever it was, there's kind of a mark on the ground where you can tell where the wall was, so you can see. And the interesting thing that I found out that I didn't know before was that it wasn't West Berlin that was enclosed, it was East Berlin. And it was not meant to keep people out, it's meant to keep people in. So people were always shot trying to escape East Berlin. They used the riverways as part of their, there was always a wall. It wasn't very high. There were always two walls. But they were mostly protected by machine gun nests. So that's what they did. But people were able to get out. Very few, but there were stories of how people were able to get out.
And I think that's what's pretty cool too, that it seems from listening to other people talk about Adventures by Disney, they really tell you the story of the place that you're visiting. So you get a good sense of the history and why that place is there to why it is the way it is today. And that's pretty amazing that they did that for you.
Yes. Another thing that Berlin is famous for is graffiti. So like here, graffiti is illegal, but to the people in Berlin, graffiti is more of an art form than the people who do the graffiti are more, they consider themselves artists.
So do the people here.
Well, some people think they are, but yeah. I mean, they're generally not trying to do it, as an art form. I mean, some people do, but I think over there that's more. And so part of the tour is they teach you how to do graffiti. And they had a couple of people who that's what they do. Is they're consider themselves artists, and they showed us how they do a certain type of graffiti, that a spray paint graffiti, and how they get all their designs. Because the interesting thing is that obviously, since it's illegal, you have to be very quick, and certain of the techniques they taught us, you have to let it dry before you go on to the next stage. And so what they would do is they would paint part of it, leave the area, and come back later to finish. And so each person we have our own, I guess you can call it a painting. It looks like what the type of material painting is on. And each person did their own graffiti.
So they taught your daughter graffiti.
Mm-hmm.
My kids will love that.
Right?
Yeah. Well,
and it's funny because, spray paint, right? So they, being Disney, they don't want anybody to get all dirty and stuff. And so you were wearing these smocks. And this year happened to be hotter than they've ever experienced it. It was like in Berlin, it was 93 and quite humid. And so you're wearing this big smock. It was so hot, and people would take it off, and it was literally like dripping wet on the inside of that.
Oh man! But what a keepsake, huh? You guys got to bring your graffiti home with you.
Yes, and they packaged it up real nice. And so from the graffiti, we went to lunch in what was East Berlin at a Hofbrau, and there we had some sausages, sauerbraten, potatoes, sauerkraut. The kids got Wiener Schnitzel. As an adult, I didn't get to try any, but my daughter said that was the best schnitzel that she's ever had. And then because there was so much food, you've seen what is it, Oktoberfest? There's so much food, right? So the adult food made its way over to the children's table, but the children's food never got to the adults' table. But they gave you as much beer as you wanted, which many people enjoy. Another interesting thing about Disney is, as you know, in Europe, ice isn't a big thing for Europeans. And I like my drinks very cold, and they know Americans like things cold. And so Adventures by Disney works with every one of the restaurants, and they made sure that we had extra glasses of just stuff ice that they provided for us. Most of the adults had beer. I'm not a big drinker, so I didn't have much beer. So after lunch, we went on to the Brandenburg Gate. That's the famous place where... was it Napoleon? I think he went there and was stopped. Mm-hmm. And then we went to Checkpoint Charlie, which is one of the famous spots. They had the movie with Tom Hanks that they went to Checkpoint Charlie. Interesting enough that one of the things that we did learn about Checkpoint Charlie is it's Checkpoint Charlie because that's the sea gate. There are many other gates. And each one of these checkpoints allowed the non-Eastern Bloc people to get into West Berlin. So they had to go through these checkpoints in order to get into West Berlin from outside of, because West Berlin is completely surrounded by the East. And they told stories about how, an American soldier is passing through and, he has all this identification. The East German or the Russian person would say, why do you need to come here? And the American soldier's going like, I have to go to West Berlin. That's where I work. But they would question him all the time about, why did he need to go through the checkpoint? So, and then, after that, after Virgin Checkpoint Charlie, you had a little time to visit the city. It wasn't much. So my daughter's favorite thing when we go to a foreign city is she tries to find a snack store or a grocery store, and she's trying to buy candy from that country. And so we asked our ABD guide, and they pointed us to a spot, and that spot only spoke German. So they brought one of our German guides to help us pick out the right things for my daughter. And then after Checkpoint Charlie and the time in the city, then we went back to the ship. Again, they ran the train at full speed, and we got back in 2.5 hours. So out of the 2 hours we were late, we only got back to the ship an hour later than normal. The interesting again about ABD specialty is that on the train, the ABD people got the first class cabin on the train. Now, on a German train, I wouldn't exactly call that first class. It was just not the worst class. We had our own private bathroom, and we had more room, and that was pretty much it. And for people just in general taking the train ride into Berlin, cell coverage is very poor on that train ride. I guess because you're going mostly through just the country.
From Warnemünde, then you make your way over to Tallinn, Estonia, and
no,
not to Tallinn.
Tallinn's the last day.
Okay. Okay. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We're going the actual opposite direction than most people do.
Gotcha.
So the next day, again, we had another day at sea already.
Uh-huh.
So what we did is, my wife and I, we've never been to Palo before. We just walked up to the restaurant on that day and said, do you have any openings? And they said, oh, yeah, sure. Come on in. And so we had brunch at Palo, and I had always looked at the menu and I went, looks all right, Italian food. But everybody, raves about it, so we said, okay, we'll try it. And I get there, and the ABD guide said, okay, make sure you try this and this. And they said, make sure you try the chicken parmesan. I go, chicken parmesan? I mean, I've had that a gajillion places. It's always, bleh. It's just dried chicken with breading and spaghetti on top. But in Palo, I was amazed at how juicy this chicken was, how light the breading was, and the tomato sauce they use San Marzano tomatoes, which are tomatoes from Italy, and they are the sweetest tomatoes that you've ever had. You can get San Marzano tomatoes in America in a can. If you can, you should try some tomato sauce with San Marzano tomatoes. They are spectacular. And I was surprised that besides the regular menu, there's also like a buffet. They don't really tell you that when you look at it. You guys are probably well familiar with that, but I was completely unprepared for having a buffet, and you could order any dish off the menu. It's not order one dish, you order whatever you want. And so brunch took hours.
That is my favorite. It is my absolute favorite meal on Disney cruise ships. So good. So much food.
So anybody who's not done Palo for brunch, don't just look at the menu. Just go and experience it, and you'll love it.
Steve, have you ever done Palo for brunch?
We have not done brunch yet. We've only done dinner, but it is definitely on our bucket list of things to do because it just sounds amazing.
Yeah, you definitely need to try it.
Okay, so we're going backwards then. So your next stop after your day at sea is into Stockholm then, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Our stop in Sweden is we went to the Vasa Museum. And the Vasa is a ship from the 17th century that is 90% intact from when it was originally built. If you look at this ship, and for me, this is the kind of thing that really interests me. When I went to the Mediterranean, I wanted to go to all the 7 wonders of the world, or at least the ones that I could see. I even when we went to Rhodes, I went to the spot where the Colossus of Rhodes was supposed to be, even though there's absolutely no indication that it was even there. But then to see this Vasa ship, and it's 90% intact, I mean, this thing was spectacular. And they give you the whole story. Our guide from Stockholm, he told us the whole story of this ship and how the the king at that time, he wanted this spectacular ship. It was supposed to be, his, where he would command out of. And the ship was very ornate, and there's all kinds of wooden carvings on there. The people, it had fallen apart when it was in the water, and they literally made sure that each piece that they found went into its original spot by measuring the size of the dowels that held things into place. It was unbelievable at how well preserved the ship is from the 17th century. You get to walk all the way around it. It's completely within a building which used to be a dry dock. That's where they originally pulled the ship in to work on it. And it's many floors, and that you can walk, like 4 or 5 stories up this building as you go to look at each level of the ship. You're not allowed on the ship. Only restoration people are allowed on board. The interesting thing about this ship is that the type of wood and the water that it was in, it's turning into acid. And so the ship is slowly deteriorating. And they say maybe in a couple decades at most, it'll probably disintegrate. So if you get a chance to go to Stockholm, I highly suggest visiting the Vasa Museum. It is quite a thing. And typical with ABD, again, we were first off the ship, so we were first in the museum. And when you're first in the museum, there's, obviously there's no one there, and you get to take some pictures before the crowds hit. So about an hour after we're there, the regular cruise people start filtering in, and then the building immediately gets so full it's hard to take good pictures of everything. So that's another ABD thing about that they do. So by us getting first off the ship in every port, we always got to a place where a regular shore excursion would often visit, but they'd get there an hour after we did. And so we always had an hour of just our group there. So after the Vasa Museum, we had a walking tour of the old town, and they have this Coronation Church. It's pretty interesting. There used to be a lot of Vikings in Stockholm, and there's these cornerstones of buildings where the Vikings had left their carvings on some cornerstones of buildings that are still intact. So after walking around the city and looking at the church, we had lunch. And you're in Sweden, so what are you going to have? Swedish meatballs. So my personal introduction to Swedish meatballs is IKEA, and but you have these Swedish meatballs, and they were told that it was one of the better restaurants in Stockholm, and these Swedish meatballs were amazing. My daughter couldn't stop talking about it. They were the best meatballs I've ever had, and you go, well, it's just meatballs and gravy and some mashed potatoes. But I mean, even the mashed potatoes, they were creamy mashed potatoes. They're they use a ricer. I'm not familiar. I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with a ricer to mash the potatoes, and it creates a more creamy texture of a potato. And so that lunch was, for me, the best lunch that we had was the Stockholm meatballs. So after that, we go to the City Hall of Stockholm. It was fairly crowded, not too crowded, because it was more in the afternoon and some people had already been there already. But they try to break up the tour groups, and so that, when you're walking through a room, that we're mostly the only ones in there as we're taking our tour through their City Hall. And their City Hall is quite old, and it's where they have the Nobel Peace Prize banquet. It's within that City Hall. And they told us the story of how the Nobel Prize dinner goes, and they had some interesting stories, side stories that I don't exactly remember the details, so I don't want to get it wrong. So, but that they did have some neat stories about the Nobel Prize dinner. It filled up this whole City Hall. There's it's not really a banquet room, but it's just this big area that they could put, lots of tables and whatnot. So that was the end of Stockholm. The next stop is Helsinki. Okay. And Helsinki was a shorter day. We didn't get into port until 10. It's really just a sightseeing boat ride around the harbor, tour of Suomenlinna Island, and it's an old fort that had never been breached before. The only time it was ever captured was because they gave up. And there's also when we got back from that boat tour, we went back into the city, and there's a church that I'm not going to try to pronounce. It's too long and it's too many consonants, but they call it the Rock Church. And this church was built inside of the stone. And that's what's interesting about that. And so they have a lot of concerts in this church because the acoustics in there are amazing. You can hear people talking from very far away quite clearly. So they ask you not to say a whole lot while you're in there.
Yeah, the Church of the Rock, we were actually, when we visited there, they were actually having a wedding. And so we got there, we only just got to walk around for about like 15 minutes or so, and then they kicked us out because they were clearing the whole place out for a wedding that day. So it's kind of an amazing church, isn't it?
Yes, and we were actually kicked out for a wedding.
Oh, well, there you go.
So apparently there's a lot of weddings there.
Yeah, summertime and weddings at the Church of the Rock in Helsinki. So, okay,
Yeah.
So from Helsinki, you guys make your way to probably the crown jewel of Northern Europe. You guys head over to St. Petersburg, am I correct?
That's correct. And here begins the time of where we're going to see a lot of museums. At this point, every tour becomes museum after museum. Even the countries that weren't Russia were controlled by Russia, so they have a lot of influence by either Peter or I can't remember the lady who was the queen.
Catherine?
Yes, Catherine. Yeah. So everything's either Catherine's palace or Peter's palace. So St. Petersburg, I had expected Russia to be very dingy and gloomy and sort of like what I saw in East Berlin. But St. Petersburg is a very, very vibrant city. All the colors of all the buildings it's a pastel color, but they make it in a bright way. All the buildings are very well colored. I was quite shocked at how beautiful the city was. I believe there's a law that you can't leave your place unpainted for so many years. You have to keep the upkeep of your building. And all the buildings there are very interesting. We stopped at Peterhof Palace. That's a very long tour. Even though we were the first there, it's still quite a long time to get in and out of that palace. There's a lot to see. There's all kind. Russia calls it their version of Versailles. For anyone who's seen Versailles, this is not Versailles, but it is pretty spectacular. And there's a lot of gold there. Catherine, who decorated a lot of Peter's palace, or Peterhof Palace, she loved her gold, and it's all in that Baroque style. And every place we go, they talk about, okay, this is the Baroque style. And then what it meant was a lot of gold. One of the things that ABD does well is that, we have a lot of museum tours. Every place you get a Vox box. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but it's where you have a headset, and so the guide talks into his or her mic, and so you can hear them clearly even if they're, meters away. So that's a nice guide, especially for me. I tend to try to stay real close to the guide normally because I can't hear all the way in the back. But with this, it didn't matter. You didn't have to be right there. You could hear everything, and there was a ton to explain in the palace. Interesting at the palace, every room has people guarding things. They have sensors everywhere. If you're like inches off the path that you're supposed to be, an alarm goes off and they tell you to move back. You're not allowed there. They don't want you to linger in any room. So even taking pictures was difficult. And that's why, again, having a guide taking pictures as well as your pictures, you get a lot more coverage because in Peterhof Palace, they're really trying to get you through there as fast as possible. So every room, you're not spending a whole lot of time in there. It's because so many people are visiting it. There's thousands of people there every day. After that, we took a hydrofoil back to town. It wasn't my first time on a hydrofoil, but it's a fun journey, and it's a lot less choppy, even though you're in the harbor, and it's quite quick. And then we had lunch, and there for Russia we had stroganoff. In Russia, at lunch we always had champagne. We also had as much vodka as we wanted, and they really refilled their glasses quickly. I mean, if you like vodka, they let you go quite a bit. For them, it's more like water. For me, one glass was plenty.
One glass?
After that,
like glass?
Yeah, I just did one glass, and it's a small glass. It's not a big glass. And I don't want to be drunk on a tour. Then we did a canal boat ride through the city, and this is where the ABD fun starts taking place. They brought some entertainment on board as a surprise, and these people, they did their Russian dances and songs, some traditional, and they were all dressed traditionally. And then where the fun begins is they start getting each of the members of the tour and they're getting us to do different dances, and then the lady main singer, she's flirting with the men, stealing them from their wives, and it was quite fun. The video really makes it a great thing. So after that boat ride, an interesting thing on this boat ride, it's not necessarily an ABD thing because they didn't arrange it. There's this guy who literally, we're on a boat, right? And we're going, maybe 10 knots. And there's this guy on the side, and he's running along the canals. And he stops on every bridge that we go under, and he waves at us. And he chases us through this whole thing, through this whole half-hour tour on a boat. And he constantly kept up with the boat, even though we got in the main channel and turned back around. And he met us at the end. And the kids were like, the first time they said they waved at him because he was waving, and he was very enthusiastic. But, when we get to the third or fourth bridge, and then he's still there, and the kids were just having a blast watching this guy chase us. And then the guide tells me, yeah, the people in Russia, I think he's just doing it for tips. So they gathered up some tip money and they gave it to him. But they really didn't want to encourage him too much. But the fun thing was that the kids really, really enjoyed this character. And it was amazing that he could, he probably is like a runner like Steve. And he was very in shape to keep up, because he had to go pretty fast to keep up with us. And he kept up a nice steady pace. So, and after that, we went to the Church of the Savior on Spilled Blood. So it's this church looks more like what you would expect of Russia. Has those mushroom-shaped tops, and there's all kinds of detailed mosaics inside, and it's what I expected to see in Russia in this building, and is very interesting. They also had some Russian dancers outside doing where you're kind of squatting and you're kicking your legs out, things that people like me can't even do. So my daughter, being a dancer, she said she's going to try this, and she was able to do from the squatting and doing the kicks. So we have some interesting pictures with them. So, but then the highlight of Russia comes after that church is we went to the Hermitage Museum. So what ABD does is they wait until it closes. So we go there, and the museum is completely closed. We're the only ones in there. And this museum is so large that we were told that we saw 3% of the museum. And that took, 3 hours. There's some interesting, you see some Rembrandts, Da Vinci's. The interesting thing that I saw in there, they have an exact duplicate of Raphael's version of the Bible. So everyone heard in the Vatican Museum how Da Vinci has his Bible on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel. Well, also in the Vatican, Raphael did his version of the Bible in this corridor. And in the Hermitage, there's an exact duplicate of it. And I was the only one in our tour group who had seen the actual Vatican version of it, because that area is not open to the public. I was able to see it on a private tour of the Vatican. There's also some Michelangelo, Monet, Van Gogh, and the Hermitage is just so big. Again, because it's closed, we had special guards of the museum making sure that we're moving along and not lingering too much, and that as soon as we exited the room, they would close the door behind us. They didn't want anybody getting away from the group. So we returned back to ship well past dinner time. And so what they did was the ship had kept Cabanas open late for us.
Wow.
So we went to Cabanas. The next day we go on to Catherine's Palace. Again, you have to wait in this long line to get into Catherine's Palace. And this palace is a little more bright. It's white, gold, and blue on the outside. Again, it's another Baroque museum, but it had gone through quite a significant amount of World War II damage, and they had restored it completely. And there's one section of that palace that they showed what it used to look like right after World War II, and their work to restore it. The highlight of Catherine's Palace is their amber workshop. Anybody who's seen the Jurassic Park movies knows about amber, the sap that gets fossilized. Well, they use it as decoration there, and they showed how they use it. The interesting thing that ABD taught us there is that there's 3 types of amber. There's a yellow amber, which most people are familiar with, a clear amber, and a white amber, which is mostly opaque. And the white is the most expensive and rarest. Our lunch after Catherine's Palace, again, meatballs. And then after that is mostly shopping, because it was the second day. After lunch, most people just went around shopping. They dropped you off in a place where you can go to an expensive place and a more inexpensive place right next to each other. But it turned out the expensive place had a lot of expensive stuff, but they had all the same inexpensive stuff. So if you just went to the expensive place, that would have been a better, use of your time.
Thinking about St. Petersburg, the cruise that you're on, you guys get 2 days there. Disney also runs a 7-day cruise through Northern Europe, where they only spend 1 day in St. Petersburg. What are your thoughts on that? As far as, there's just so much to see there. Was it nice to have the 2 days to be able to see all that versus having everything kind of crammed into one?
Yeah, even just that first day, how we got off early and we stayed there to like 10 o'clock, and there's just so much to do there, so much to see. Cruises in general, it's more highlights. You guys are familiar with that, right?
Yep.
You tend to get you interested to make you come back and get more detailed. But you couldn't even get highlights in 1 day in St. Petersburg. There's just too much to see and do there. Even as it was, my daughter would have really loved to see a real Russian ballet there. And there's just no time. So being 2 days, I think, is a minimum. That it's like going to Venice. I wouldn't go to Venice for just a day. You need at least a couple days.
Yeah, if you can swing it, if it works, I think that 2 days in St. Petersburg is really well time were spent, because I think it's one of those places that probably most of us are not going to go back to.
Right.
And so if you can have those 2 days there to kind of really take in a little bit more, and I know you're kind of cramming it in, but maybe breathe a little bit in between some of the stops, that seems like the best way to do it. So. Yeah, see, I was really amazed by St. Petersburg. Did you see the behind the Peterhof Castle or Palace? Did you see the huge fountains that they had?
Yes. So on
amazing.
Our way out, on our way to the hydrofoil, we had to walk through that garden. We took a lot of pictures in that garden in the back. It's spectacular in there. And then it's the funny story is, as you walk out through that garden, that's where the line is for the people who don't have reservations to get into the palace. And if you look at that line, it's amazing at how many people are there.
Just the Hermitage, being able to have the place almost to yourself like that evening. It was just wall-to-wall people when we were there. So what an amazing ability to be able to do that and see the stuff the way you did it with ABD.
Yes, and you really don't get a feel for what something is like until you see it when it's less crowded. Like, I was fortunate enough to be in the Sistine Chapel in a group of 6 of us, and that was it. They closed it. We had a half an hour in the Sistine Chapel, just the 6 of us, and we were allowed to take pictures in there. And it's a completely different experience than being in there with 1,000 people. So it's little touches like that really make a big difference.
That makes it worth it, definitely. So from there, you guys head on over to Tallinn, and I believe this is your last stop before you get to Copenhagen?
That's correct. Tallinn is, again, a very short day. We just go to the old town of Tallinn, and it's a fortress city. And the interesting thing there for me, again, it being a fort, they showed us how it went from where they would use a trebuchet to defend it, so the tower would have no roof, to a later day when they had cannons, and then they built a roof over the top so that they could put the cannons in there. So this just a walled city. It's a tough walking for if you're not used to it. There's a lot of cobblestones and very uneven ground. Tallinn is quite small city, not a whole lot to see. We also did another Catherine's Palace. I think it's called the Kadriorg. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right. It's one of her summer palaces, but she only ever used it once. So it was interesting. It's a small palace, but they had some interesting, like their clothes from that time. And they had a room full of all their clothes that the different people wore depending on your status. So that was a little interesting in that palace. And that was a very, very short day. We got off late. We got back on. No, we got in the morning, but we got back on in the early afternoon. So that day was more relaxing. And after so many port days in a row, a lot of the people in our group, they were thankful for a short day because especially after St. Petersburg. St. Petersburg was a tough day for the people who who don't move well. Like we had one lady who she would prefer to be in a wheelchair, but there's a lot of places that we couldn't have a wheelchair. So what they did was they kept one guide back to help make sure that, because she couldn't always keep up, they kept one guide with her to make sure that she didn't get lost.
Well, from Tallinn, then you finish up with your last day at sea as you head towards Copenhagen. What kind of finishing touch does ABD do? Do they have kind of an ending dinner then that last night for you guys, or how does that work?
So exactly like the regular ABD trip, they have a final dinner. They show you, what they do is they take a compilation of their favorite pictures and they make a animated slideshow with music, and they provide that that video to you along with your other pictures, and it's a chance to say goodbye to everybody. By this time, it's a long trip. Everybody knows each other quite well, and email addresses and Facebook accounts are passed along. And I still keep in contact with people from my Backstage Magic and this trip through Facebook, and you really get to know people pretty well. You become a pretty close knit group, more so than a regular tour, because you're with the same people every day. You eat with them, you tour with them, just like the regular ABD. It's almost like a family. Not everybody gets along with everybody, and that's to be expected. But for the most part, I think it's an enjoyable experience for everybody.
I kind of get the sense that it's kind of in some ways you have that similar want to learn, want to get out there and explore, and that similarity kind of helps bond you guys together when you're in that kind of group experience, huh?
Yes.
So kind of looking back on it then, Kyle, is this something that, well, I should ask first, what cruise did your daughter and her friends plan for you guys next?
So our next trip is on board. We booked the Christmas cruise on a Fantasy.
Okay.
But when we got back, it was just too close to when we just cruised, so we pushed it back to a July cruise. We're going to the Western Caribbean on the Fantasy, and it'll be our first time on the Fantasy. So I'm looking forward to being able to visit, and I have to keep my fingers crossed that I get on the excursion to visit Chichen Itza.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
So that's a bucket list place for me to visit.
Great opportunity to be able to see the ruins there in Mexico. So is this something that you think you'll do again, either ABD with Disney Cruise Line or just Adventures by Disney in general?
Adventures by Disney in general we'll probably do again. They're quite pricey, so we have to space them apart. You've mentioned it before. I believe you mentioned before on one of your other podcasts that how everybody talks about. I'm a Disney Vacation Club member, and everybody talks about don't waste your DVC points on Disney cruises or on ABD. I talked in detail with a DVC person. Obviously, it's slanted towards DVC, but I talked to them, and he brought together a spreadsheet of how it works, and he goes, well, it's really up to you, but so you get like a 50-some% discount by doing DVC on a Vacation Club Villa, and on a cruise or ABD you're only getting 20-some%. But he goes, well, it's still 20% something off of something that you really want to do, and it's really up to you if that's the best way to do it. And for me, you could always sell your points and get close to a little better deal, but then that's always a little bit of a hassle. Some people don't mind doing that, and that's good. If you're willing to do that, you should do that. But for me, that's a little extra hassle. I'll just use my points and probably save up for another ABD.
I mean, that's the beauty of it. You can use them however you want to do that as far as being a DVC member, but it's nice to have that perk too. At least when you do book ABD, you get the opening day price or the original price. You're aware of that one, right?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So,
yes.
Well, cool, Kyle. I know this ended up being a little bit longer than we thought it would be. I knew it was going to be a little bit longer though because of the all the different cool ports that you guys got to see. I really want to thank you for coming on and taking time out of your day to share your experiences and just kind of the magic of Disney Cruise Line up in Northern Europe. So I appreciate you coming on and want to wish you and your family the best as you finally travel on the Fantasy. And I'd love to have you come back on and we could compare the Fantasy. The two of us are finally going on it here this next year, huh?
And I just want to make one note. I really love it when you have, I'm not sure of his name, but he's the German fellow that works in that shipbuilding area.
Oh, Florian, yes.
Yes, and I really love it when he's on It's so amazing. Your podcast and you and Christy provide information that I don't get from other places, and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, unfortunately he's out. Well, fortunately for him,
he's working.
He's working right now. So, but when he gets off, we'll definitely get him back on and do some more shows. So, well, thanks again, Kyle, for your time today. Really appreciate it.
And sorry for being so wordy.
No.
It was totally fine.
Very exciting.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and we'll look forward to talking to you soon.
All right. Thank you.
All right. Bye. Well, that's going to wrap up our show today. Once again, I really want to thank Kyle for coming on and taking time to share his and his family's experiences as they traveled on the Disney Magic through Northern Europe this past summer and their experiences with Adventures by Disney. And believe it or not, Thanksgiving is already past us, which means we're moving into the holiday season really rapidly now as Christmas is upon us. And for all of you that are cruising with Disney over the next month on the Very Merry Time cruises, Christy and I would really like to wish you all the best as you head out on your sail dates and as you head out on your next adventure. If you would like to get a hold of Christy and I between now and our next show, you can always reach me at DCL Podcast on Facebook, also on Twitter at DCL Podcast. Of course, you can always find Christy over at PackYourPixieDust.com or PackYourPixieDust on Twitter, and that's Pack Your Pixie Dust on Facebook. And she is out sailing on the Celebrity Edge right now, and I look forward to her coming back, and we're going to have a show all about that brand new ship, which just started sailing down out of Miami, I believe, and we're looking forward to getting a trip report from her. So between now and our next show, if you and your family are heading out on your next vacation, all of us here at the DCL Podcast would like to wish you fair winds and safe travels as you head out on your next adventure. Once again, thanks for coming back and taking a listen, and we'll see you next time on the DCL Podcast.